Wondering ways to reduce your risk of developing dementia or Alzheimer's or experiencing those kind of symptoms?
Yes.
Yeah, who isn't? Everybody is. We've done videos about this before. So we're going to break into a series where weekly we're going to talk about the different ways that you can, or things that you can do to reduce your risk of developing dementia.
So we're going to start a series.
We're starting a series.
Wow, I love it.
Very exciting.
Series on dementia.
And number one is education.
And just before we jump into it, don't forget we have a podcast
We
now.
do have a podcast.
Yeah, if you're sick of looking at us, you can just listen to us.
Yes, go over there.
Go to the podcast.
So number one is education, and before we even get into that, why does it even matter? Like how does education, how does learning, how does it change our ability to battle dementia and Alzheimer's? And it all comes down to cognitive reserve.
Right, the theory behind all of the things we're about to talk about is that they increase synaptic activity in your brain. The synapse is sort of where one neuron talks to another neuron. Neuron are your brain cells, right? That's how you process information, store information, and the synapses is how they communicate with each other.
Right.
And it's funny how the word neuron is so good, but moron is an insult.
They're very
so close together.
A couple letters.
Moron must mean lack of neurons or something.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
So
I would never call anyone a moron.
So cognitive density, it's kind of like, it's like an emergency fund or like a savings account where if you run into trouble, you can kind of draw on this. And what our bodies do is build up this cognitive reserve in our brain.
Yes.
A bunch of different ways. So the first one is like you talked about, so increased synaptic density. So literally the number of connections between the different nerves in our brain, we can increase these with certain activities.
Right, and neurogenesis, that's something I learned. I wasn't aware that even as adults, we can still create new neurons.
Yes, particularly in the hippocampus.
Right, the
responsible for memory.
That's right. And the other sort of theory area of research is the brain plasticity.
Easy
how the
to
brain
say.
can sort of, not even. How the brain can sort of is plastic in a way that it can change what it does, change areas, increase some areas of its function, decrease other areas, and just change with time.
Right, so within...
In a good way.
Yes, for sure. And so within that scope of education, we're going to give you 10 things that you can do in your life starting now.
Yeah.
That increase your cognitive reserve and help battle the risk of getting dementia.
The first is go back to high school and pay attention. Was that the first one?
Well, that actually kind of is number one. So number one is formal education.
Yeah, formal education. We're not talking about going back to high school and actually paying attention. You never paid attention in high school.
I did not.
You were a troublemaker.
I got done quickly and then kind of wreaked havoc.
You peaked later.
Yeah, that's right.
Education-wise.
Thankfully.
Were you on the football team?
I was not.
Okay.
No. I was too small.
Right.
I was a little when I was
Still are.
Yeah.
Wow. So education, some kind of formal education, right? You're talking about like signing up for a course or going back to continuing education at school or something like that.
Well, no, so the first one is actually formal education, so like high school, university, or college, because there are good studies that show how far you go in school predicts your development of dementia.
Right.
So that's the first one. So, and this kind of drives policy to stay in school. So yes, obviously we can't go back in time and stay in school, but it is important for our governments and our governing bodies to encourage people to stay, because this is going to reduce our risk of developing dementia.
Yeah.
But the second one is that kind of lifelong learning thing. So yeah, considering doing other things like going back to college, online learning, or even self-directed learning. That's been shown to reduce your risk.
And there's tons of resources for online learning now. You can sign up for courses online all the time.
Absolutely. Number three,
I would say, your hobbies, intellectual type hobbies. Like, pick a hobby that actually you need to use your brain a little bit for.
Sure.
We're not talking about making the Rubik's Cube your hobby.
No.
But some kind of hobby where you're actively engaged in thinking, processing, getting better at it. That kind of hobby is what I'm talking about.
Love it. Number four is new skills. So new skills, particularly languages and music. Mm-hmm. So they've done studies to show that bilingual people show signs of dementia later on in life. Did you know that?
We say trop.
I know, yeah. Do you have two, or how many languages do you know?
I can, English and French.
Yes.
I'm not good at French, but I can get by.
Yeah,
and then I can understand a little bit of Arabic.
There you go. So three. Yeah. That's pretty good.
No, that's not bad.
Okay.
What about you?
No, one, English.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Number five.
You've been told to reduce your screen time a whole bunch, right? But maybe not, because there are some educational apps out there that are fun to do, but they do kind of train your brain, right? And a lot of people get into them. A lot of people, find these apps and just get addicted to them and overdo it. But I'm not talking about going crazy with them, but spending some time with some educational apps instead of watching boring stuff like talking with docs. Why don't you actually do something where you're thinking?
Sure, and they've done studies on a lot of these apps to see whether or not it actually makes a difference long term. What they have found is that it actually makes you very good at whatever question the app is teaching you.
Yeah.
So whether they're math-based or English-based or whatever, writing-based. However, there are limited long-term data to show that make a big difference. The ones that probably have had the biggest benefit are Neurogen MD and Brain HQ.
Yeah.
There was one called Lumosity. Unfortunately, they got sued because they made too many claims about their ability to prevent dementia.
Right.
So you have to be a little bit careful. So I think they're a smaller part of a bigger strategy, but definitely they can play a role. Just don't make the app your only way that you're going to try to reduce your
No,
risk.
don't put all your eggs in that basket.
No.
And don't use it when you're walking down the street.
Okay, there you go.
Right.
I like
Next.
it. Okay, so social and educational engagement type activities. So things like book club.
Wine club, you mean?
Well, so this is the thing.
There's
So
a gray area between book club and
it
wine club.
definitely is. Like, I've never been in a book club, but when I talk to people about their book club, I'm not convinced everybody reads the book.
Yeah. No,
And I'm not convinced that when they're there, they're actually talking about the book.
probably not. But some people do. There are some actual book clubs where they do discuss the novel that they...
Agreed. Have you ever been in a book club?
No.
No, me either.
No.
I was wondering if, because a lot of people discuss a lot of stuff nowadays, and our society unfortunately seems to be very fractured, and people like to argue about a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I was wondering, what if you argued your point really well? Do you think that would be good for preventing
It's
dementia?
using your brain.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know.
I don't know. But I've never been in a book club.
No,
but
me
I have, my wife has been in a book club before, and she loved it. I mean, she talked about it all the time, and it was quite engaging.
When they say the social part actually is a big
Yeah.
part of health and well-being, so that's probably part of it. Okay, number 7.
Yeah, another one that I don't regularly do, it would be
Okay.
some form of mindful meditation.
Yes.
I'm
Okay.
no expert in that.
Nope.
But the thinking behind it is that you're spending time and you're just in your mind and you're creating those synapses and strictly focusing on your brain and your thinking and your thoughts.
Yeah, so improves your memory, improves your focus, and also your emotional well-being, which
Yeah.
is part of your general good health.
Yeah. Have you ever done it?
What? Mindfulness?
Yeah.
Yeah, I try. To be honest, I know you think no, there's no way that I have.
No, I wasn't.
Yeah, I can
I'm
see
not
that.
judging.
The
I'm
video
not
was
ju-
actually
I'm not
totally a
judging.
judging look.
I'm not judging.
I've used it before bed to
Really?
try to get a good night's sleep, because I
okay.
find sometimes when I can't go to sleep, my mind is very busy. So if you can kind of push all that stuff away and then focus on relaxing and getting some sleep.
Did it work?
So I use an app now that kind of talks me to sleep.
Oh,
and
okay.
It talks for like 10 minutes, and I
Right.
can never get to the end.
Oh, okay.
I'm always asleep before it's over.
I just watched some of our videos and I'm out like a light.
Some of the older ones.
Yeah,
particularly.
for sure.
Okay, number 8 is creative arts. So things that engage your brain to make stuff. So whether that's writing or sewing or painting, things that really, really engage, kind of that kind of stuff, have been shown to make a big difference in your brain function as well as your plasticity.
Makes total sense, right?
Yeah.
It's along the lines of all the other stuff we've been talking about, just use your brain.
Yeah.
The other one's a little bit of a red herring, but physical activity.
Wow, what?
Physical activity has been shown as
How?
well. I think physical activity, especially if you engage in some sort of physical activity that involves some kind of thinking with it, or strategy.
Yes.
Like pickleball, for example.
Pickleball. So yeah.
There's a little strategy
I'm
there.
still dealing with, now my other Achilles is gone. I've got 2 Achilles tendonitis right for
Yeah,
pickleball.
the thinking there is, how am I going to be able to play this with all the injuries I have and without hurting myself?
It's funny though, so for anyone that does play pickleball, the serving and the rules are so complicated. People are always asking, who served, what's the score? And so I feel like the memory part's not really working. Leave a comment if you play pickleball and you've had battles with the serving. But what I would say is,
what is it, dance moves? Where
dance
you have to
moves,
remember
for
all
sure.
the dance moves, or
yoga, specific posture,
martial arts, for
and
example.
Tai Chi. You and I have talked before, where I think it's a complicated series of movements, and I've never done Tai Chi, but it makes sense that if you have to remember a specific order, or even like karate or something like that, probably do that.
Tai Chi looks random though. When I see them doing that outside on a grassy knoll, I always think it's just random movements. But I think there's some thought behind it.
We've joked before. To me, it seems like really slow fighting. So if you had 200, 100-year-old people fighting, maybe they would fight really slowly.
Two guys with their black belts in Tai Chi, and then So that's some sort of physical activity where you have to think. But even just physical activity on its own, because it's increasing your blood flow to your brain, and we've learned every day. It seems I learn something new that is good about physical activity.
Totally agree. Last one is volunteering or a part-time job. So as we get older, some people find that just the simple goal of retiring and want to just play pickleball or work on your golf game or whatever,
watch TV,
is not necessarily a functional way to retire. So if you have a purpose, that's the first thing. But if you're doing something that engages your brain regularly, so you know who I think for me epitomizes this is those experts at Home Depot.
I was just gonna say,
you're walking down the aisle and you're like, listen, my toilet's clogged or whatever, and then some super nice guy wearing a little outfit says, hey, try this, don't do this, definitely don't do this. this, and you're like, oh, I already did that.
Gives you the DIY on it all. Yeah.
So I think something like that. So or volunteering in that capacity too. A, it keeps you socially engaged.
Right.
B, makes you happy and gies you a purpose and helps your brain as well.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say those guys.
Yeah.
The other thing that I found really interesting when we were reviewing this was that landmark article, I think it was in 2006, looking at a British, or London, I think it was, taxi drivers versus bus drivers.
Yes.
And they did some MRI imaging, and they found that the hippocampus was a more developed and more plastic and changing more in the taxi driver group, right? Who have to be completely aware of spatial orientation, spatial recognition, which is a role of the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is intimately related to the development of Alzheimer's disease too.
2006, that's very interesting. What do you think Waze has done for those poor people?
Oh my God, well, GPS, right?
Yeah, right. Waze tells me get off the highway because there's a parked car on the shoulder up ahead.
Oh.
Like, so you don't, that's such a, so you can see, you just realize that Dr. Zalza does not commute as far as I do. So I need to know what's happening up ahead, not just how to get there.
You're right.
I need to know the different roads. I need to get off.
Yes, you're right.
Because there's a guy on the shoulder.
I use Google Maps or Apple Maps too.
Yeah, that'll tell you how to get there.
But there was another article more recently, 2024, where they looked at a bunch of mortality data, like I think almost 10 million people or something like that. And they looked at mortality, what you died from.
Yep.
It was part of this data set, as well as what your occupation was. Oh. So they looked at the subset of people that died from Alzheimer's disease as their cause of death. And there's about, I don't know, roughly around 3%.
Okay.
And it turns out that taxi drivers and ambulance drivers had way lower than that as Alzheimer's, their cause of death.
I want my ambulance driver to know how to get there.
Right?
He should use Waze.
So that sort of linked in that hippocampus study to, well, wait a minute, maybe there is something there. Now, I mean, this is a retrospective study, it's a population sort of review, so maybe those type of people who are good at spatial orientation went in to become taxi drivers or ambulance drivers. Yeah. Who knows? But in any case, they were definitely associated with a lower cause of death by Alzheimer's disease.
Sure. You wonder, same thing probably for firefighters, you know, the guys driving fire trucks.
Yeah, but you're right.
Did you ever see that episode of Seinfeld when Kramer was driving the fire truck and he's like, take this route, go, and then they end up at the
We're going to make a left onto Broadway. No, I would advise against that. Who is this? It's Kramer! Kramer!
It reminds me of the Saturday Night Live skit where they're like the Californians take the 49, go down. Remember, they give each other those elaborate stuff. But so there is something to be said there about brain activity, brain plasticity in your brain. But you're right, GPS, holy cow, that's going to be really, like any of those apps that tells you where to drive, you're zoning out when you're driving, you're just following the directions.
Now you know how to train your brain. Top 10 ways to keep your brain active to reduce your risk of developing dementia. Stay tuned because every week we're going to break down all the different ways that we can reduce the risk of dementia, which is unfortunately becoming a much bigger problem in our society. If you like this video, please like it, subscribe to our channel, share it with someone that you think find interesting, and be sure to check out our podcast.
And remember, you are in charge of your own health, and turns out you're in charge of your own brain plasticity, synaptic control, and neurogenesis.
There you go. I'll see you next time.